Hello, I'm Robert, and so continuing that previous video that I just did, and I've talked about all the reasons why it doesn't look as if Trump is really being sincere about his interest in Greenland at all. He just making a big noise about it, as far as I can tell. And then looking at the various negative effects that are likely to be. And I talked about how he's very much like Laurel and Hardy, that the Laurel character in Laurel and Hardy, who just gets into all these scrapes and then somehow gets out of them again. And I think Trump, sometimes he has long-term planning, like he did with Venezuela, but sometimes I don't think there's any plan, and he's just getting into one scrape after another and then finds his way out again. And I think this might be a case of that. So the worst case here is that the Supreme Court, they might, I talked in the previous video, that the Supreme Court in the deliberations in November, they even asked the question, if we require the government to pay back all the tariffs, is that a practical thing to do? And so the justice that asked that question, they obviously were thinking that they may make it retrospective, that not only just stop Trump's authority to impose these tariffs, but force him to pay back the $200 billion that he's already collected. That'd be a huge amount. That's equivalent to more than a fifth of the defense spending for next year, which is $900 billion. So it appeared doubtful, and then skepticism prompted Justice Amy Coney Barrett to look at the possible repercussions and said, tell me how the reimbursement process would work. That is, if they decided that Trump has to pay back. So asking that question suggested they actually considering, well, this might be how we'll have to decide. So we better find out a bit about the practicalities of it, because they do have to consider the practicalities of their decisions. So if they don't do it, it mightn't be mainly because of practicalities, and it doesn't seem very unlikely that they'll stop it going forward. And this, as I was saying, this for Trump to use Greenland to claim that it's an economic emergency power, that he has to have the ability to impose tariffs on Denmark, United Kingdom, France, Germany, etc., Finland, because of an emergency that affects the United States, which requires him to try and force these countries to go through on an illegal sale that could never actually be legal in US law. And that's a big ask of the Supreme Court, to say that this is something that a president should be permitted to be able to use these emergency powers for. So I think it wouldn't be too surprising if the Supreme Court uses this tweet as evidence in as a reasoning for their final decision, whatever it is. And if they're wavering about whether to request the government to pay back all the tariffs, this might be a little thing that tips it over and gets them to decide that he must. So it's certainly not benefiting his case, and I think it could actually make it worse. And then my personal speculation is that, so that's what I just said. And then personal speculation, a bit even more speculative, but considering that this date is looming up, 1st of February, then the Supreme Court might even say, well, look, we better to make this decision pretty pronto so that Trump doesn't impose these tariffs and make it before February the 1st. I'm not saying that they're going to do that, either of those things, but surely there's some potential for it to have adverse effects on the Supreme Court case, and it's certainly not going to help it. So, like in Laurel and Hardy, I think Trump is headed for some kind of a fall, some kind of some kind of mishap very much like the way Laurel kept getting things kept or some kind of mishap of some sort, just like all the ones that Laurel got in and Hardy got involved in because of Laurel's clumsiness. So now this is about. So now we go back to the whole thing that about Trump doesn't really seem to be interested in Greenland. And he seems to have very little interest in Greenland. So I've got a rather fun example to maybe help you with that. But so Greenland and Denmark, they said themselves that was the foreign ministers of the two countries, and they said that this was their first in-depth meeting with US administration after 13 months of threats, and after repeated requests from their side for negotiations. And he informed J.D. Vance, who's been going on and on about need to defend Greenland against China. And they said, well, we haven't actually seen a Chinese ship for over a decade. So from our point of view, it doesn't seem to be a threat from China. And they didn't say J.D. Vance came back and said, but what you don't know is, it just seems that that's it. That they told him that and he didn't know that. And from their report, they seem very straightforward people. I don't think I think they were just saying it plain as it was. And they talked about how US had 17 bases and 10,000 personnel at the head of the Cold War, and now there's only one base and 200, and that was a decision by the United States, not by Denmark or Greenland. And that they're ready to work with them. They respectfully asked the US to stop threatening them. It didn't work. US responded by threatening them with these tariffs, to threatening them even more. But and Greenland has been protesting all throughout these 13 months. And here's Greenland's Prime Minister Jens Frederiksen. I've got to make a new screenshot there because it's that chap there who's behind that banner. So it looks a little bit as if it's that chap, but that's the chap. He's there, and he's holding that flag. So I'll get a better picture of that. But he says it's our country. It's a place where we were raised and born. People lived in Greenland, which is what I was saying in the beginning of the previous video. I know it's at the beginning of the article. It's a bit like, it's not that different from why slavery is illegal. People are not allowed to sell your house and your dwelling and the place where you live to another country against your wish. It makes sense, doesn't it? And so that's the situation. It's just not permitted to do it. So if he really cared about security minerals or even ownership of Greenland, then he would have talked to them. But Trump was asked. The Premier of Greenland said today, we've purchased today with Denmark. And then Trump said, who said that? The Premier of Greenland. And Trump, well, that's their problem. I disagree with them. I don't know who he is. Don't know anything about him. That's going to be a big problem for him. So, of course, he's likely lying and knows his name, and it's likely hyperbole. I mean, he said him, and he would have said her, presumably, if it was a female Prime Minister. But it's just a very low level of interest in Greenland. So I think it makes as much as possible then settle for something minor. And I talk about, I think it's named a building or fishing vessel or something, or dog sled team. It's not about security. He's not done anything. There's only the base is in the far north, and it's only supplied in July 2025 because that's the only time of year you could do it. And the only named item was new furnishings. So that's not what you'd expect from an administration that is very concerned about the security of Greenland, is it? And it's not about minerals, because Greenland is very eager for American companies, and Trump has not done anything to help enable that. And it's not about owning it, because again, if we really wanted to own Greenland, why has he never talked about this to the Greenlanders? So this then comes to our, again, you might think they might want to be in the United States, but even then, why will you never talk to them about it? So I could use a deliberately rather silly and preposterous example. So I suppose Trump said something like this: US has to own Buckingham Palace. It's the only appropriate place for our US embassy. And it's an embarrassment that we should occupy less luxurious conditions than the royal family. Suppose Trump said something like that. He never say it that, but just to be a silly example. Then he starts a series of threats against the UK, and he tries to persuade the royal family and the UK government to surrender Buckingham Palace to the United States. And that's quite a close analogy, because in actuality, the United Kingdom could give the Buckingham Palace to the United States for use as an embassy, which would then be sovereign territory of the United States. It's never going to do that, but legally it could. No way it actually would. So, so now in this scenario, the royal family, they're not very confrontational. They just say to Trump, let's talk this over. And he agrees, always agrees to meet them. They start discussing his proposal and all that, and they politely say no. Well, in that case, you would say, oh, well, maybe he really was interested. They really thought that was possible. But now, suppose that UK Prime Minister, the King of UK and Commonwealth, repeatedly asked discussions with Trump for his request, and keeps threatening UK in various ways, and said, I'm going to put huge tariffs on the United Kingdom unless you sell us Buckingham Palace. And they keep saying, we'd like to talk to you. Can you talk a little bit about this? And he just keeps on talking about the tariffs. And then suppose, for a very close parallel, now suppose someone says to Trump, the monarch of Britain and the Commonwealth said, we prefer not to sell Buckingham Palace. And then Trump says back, who said that? The British monarch. Well, that's their problem. I disagree with them. I don't know who he is. Don't know anything about him, but that's going to be a big problem for him. So imagine, hypothetically, Trump didn't even know that his name is King Charles. Then, in that situation, you say, well, he can't be much interested in Buckingham Palace if he doesn't even know that it's the official residence at times of King Charles and the name of the king. Well, this is very similar. How can he be interested in Greenland if he doesn't know that the Prime Minister, the name of the Greenlandic Prime Minister? So that's the reasoning on which the reason why I eventually came to the conclusion. I had various other ideas early on, but looking at all the things suggested, and so of course for you to think for yourself and what you think about all this, but it's very hard to see how any of these could really be his reasons, because why wouldn't he talk to them, and why wouldn't he know nothing? Would he know so little about Greenland? And this is about all the bad news there's been recently in about the ICE enforcement in Minneapolis and the Epstein files. He's not implemented, but it's not a great look for him. A looming government shutdown, 30th of January, Obama's subsidies, and then this decision he might get against him on the tariffs, and his attempts at peace, and Nobel Prize winning, hoping for, and peace in the Gaza Strip, Iran and Ukraine, they're all taking far longer than expected. So that's about all that. And then some people worrying about would this get in the way of the Ukraine war peace process. I've got quite a long section there, distract away to go into detail about that here. But the short answer is that the peace process is continuing as is, and this is not impacting on that at all. Indeed, it might even have made it easier for them because of not having to talk so much to reporters and work more carefully on it. And they're probably going to be agreeing, they're going to agree to everything that they can sign without Putin's signatures over the next few days at the sidelines of Davos. At least that's the plan. And then after that point, it'll just be over to Putin. And so I don't want to go on into great detail about that. I can do a separate video about that, and you can read that section. So let's last go to the last bit. So, and then I think this is the end of it, yes. Yeah, that's the last section. So, And so that'll take this on to 20 minutes. That'd be a good point to stop, which will be the end of this. So I talked about this at the beginning of the first video. So why journalists don't tell us that it's legally impossible for Greenland to become part of US in US or EU or UK international law. So there's a kind of a perverse incentive here that, and you can check that they're leaving stuff out by, when you get a dramatic story in the news, you can use our fact checking to ask questions and then find out all these things that the journalists have left out. So in this particular case, why aren't any of the mainstream media, I've not seen it yet anyway, do say if you noticed it, why have anyone not even mentioned that the US itself can't recognise Greenland as part of the United States unless the Greenlanders say yes, or that Denmark can't do it legally, or that even if it was forced to do it by coercion by the tariffs, it would be not a valid treaty. So why aren't the journalists telling us all this? And then to explain, and people saying, oh, it's the same as Venezuela, but it's not. It's very, very different. Trump is not trying to buy Venezuela. He's not trying to force the Venezuelans to sell their country to him. He justified the abduction on the grounds that Maduro is an indicted criminal in the United States. And in this situation, the Supreme Court has ruled the US can try criminals even if they're brought to the US, even if they're not legally extradited. And several precedents by previous presidents. That's a bit clumsy, awkward phrase. So sadly, most people don't know these basic facts, which would make it clear this is a complete nothing burger. That it just can't be done, and it's very different from Greenland. So this little bit of anecdotally, I've been we've been doing voluntary fact checking. I set it all up about a decade ago, and during that time, during more than the first half of that decade, then we were almost never asked to fact check anything in the news, and people weren't scared by the news, not like they are now. And then for the last 3-4 years, people are mostly scared by the news that come to our help, by mainstream news. Sometimes other things, but not an awful lot of time they're scared by the mainstream news. And the mainstream news fails the most basic fact check. And this happens over and over and over again. So I think there may have been an actual change, though I don't have scientific proof of this. But I think there might have been actual change that journalists nowadays, they don't seem to pay so much attention to fact checking as they used to. They're not so careful that their articles are accurate. And they focus much more on making it dramatic and giving you eye-catching headlines and giving you eye-catching quotes from the people they interview, and much less on whether it's actually presenting the situation clearly to you and accurately. And so, and people who don't have access to fact-checking, like what we're doing, they just assume that journalists are being straightforward and telling them the truth. And that's why they get so scared, if they're vulnerable. But, and so they just have no idea about how much is left out and how they shape stories to make them more dramatic and more likely to be shared. And often the way that they shape the stories in misleading and very mistaken ways often make them seem scary when there's nothing to be scared at all. Because fear sells. Fear leads people to click, and then you get ads, or in the BBC you get higher audience figures, and you get your reputation as a journalist. So either journalists don't have time to fact check, or that they prioritize looking for dramatic quotes over fact checking. So if they do have the time, but when they've got a bit of time, instead of going and fact-checking their story, they'll go and find something else even more dramatic if they possibly can find it. And there's a perverse incentive, because a journalist who has got into a habit of just not doing very little by way of fact-checking is going to be able to write much more dramatic stories than a journalist who has got a strong habit of checking everything they write. Because the fact-checking will also often prove that the dramatic story that they wanted to run is actually false. And they might even have previous experience of having a dramatic story that got spotted by fact-checking. So I'm not saying they intentionally skimp on fact-checking, but it's an incentive that, and the ones that do skimp are more likely to succeed. So so if that's what's going on, and so if see our story like here gets your attention through, you won't believe the frightening truth hidden in their wings of butterflies. And if you write a headline like that, it gets your attention through negative bias, lots of negative words, and a curiosity gap. And this is for headline writers. And so they twist the headlines, they twist the stories to make them sound a lot scarier, and so that you then click on them, and then they get lots of ad revenue or clicks and views. So that's basically what's going on here. So this means that if you're getting scared by these stories, just step back a little bit, and with the help of our voluntary fact-checking, you can discover that actually these stories are just not true, and that it's not the world isn't full of all sorts of scary things going on. It's full of journalists that have got into the habit of just not fact-checking things, and that's essentially what's going on here. And this has always been, since the beginning, this has been a complete nothing burger since Trump started talking about it at the beginning of his term, even before he was elected. It's been going on and on and on about it. Whenever he needs something to, and it's quite noticeable, he often brings Greenland to the news at times when things are not doing very well for him, either domestically or in foreign policy. So, well, let's roll out the Greenland thing. That's always a way to get a big fuss and a lot of commotion, and then they won't notice what the other stuff that's going wrong. And so I think that's my best hypothesis to what's going on. So let's go back to the beginning, and yeah, I think I've done everything. So yes, we just basically, Trump is he's not trying to achieve anything here, and he's going to be backing down from the tariffs if he even gets to actually implement them. So if I put the link to my blog post in the video description, and so you can click through on that, and you can read up about all this. I'll embed these two videos one after another on the page, and so you can watch them one after another. Oh, excuse me, I'm just about to sneeze. So that's it. So I hope this helped any of you who are scared of many things. And this is based on, yes, this is based on the our debunks in our forum of voluntary fact checkers. So just give a heads up, that's where our forum is, and you can go and that's the tag, Greenland tag, if you want to follow this. So there's a link in the video that I linked in the blog post I linked to, that then takes you to our Greenland debunks. So, and a shout out to all the voluntary fact checkers in our forum, and they often have. So I'm just writing this. I'm writing this up based on my own research, is complemented and fact checked as well. You know, sometimes they find things that so we check each other's work and so on, and various things that the other voluntary fact checkers have been helping, and so. So anyway, so hopefully this helps you to be a little bit less scared about all this, and hopefully you can get as far as see it's a complete nothing burger, and it never was, it never will be, and it'll likely be in the news for a little bit longer until whenever something else comes up in the news, and then the journalists will say, oh well, this is a much more interesting story, and this will just fade out. and then resolve itself in some way. Maybe with Trump getting a dog sled team in Greenland named after him, or whatever it is that he has as his token resolution of it. Anyway, so hope that helps you.